The restaurant opened before sunset, just like it did every day. Soft lights reflected off polished floors, and quiet music floated through the air. Everything was carefully arranged to make rich guests feel comfortable and important. Inside the space, she worked silently. She wore a plain uniform, tied her hair back, and moved with careful steps between tables. Most people never looked at her face. To them, she was just part of the background. She had learned long ago how to become invisible. When guests spoke, she listened. When they waved, she came. When they ignored her, she didn't mind anymore. This job paid the bills, and that was what mattered. The long hours hurt her feet, and the late nights drained her energy, but she showed up every day. Not because she loved serving food, but because life had left her few choices. Outside the restaurant, her world was small. A modest room, old furniture, and quiet nights. She lived simply, counting every expense, planning each week carefully. There was no space for dreams anymore, or at least that's what she told herself. Dreams didn't pay rent. Dreams didn't fix broken things. Dreams were dangerous when reality was already heavy. But music had once been her escape. Long before she learned how to balance trays and smile politely, she learned how to listen. As a child, she noticed sounds others ignored. The hum of traffic, the rhythm of rain, the way silence could feel loud. When she first touched piano keys years ago, something inside her had woken up. Felt like home. She didn't learn from fancy schools or private teachers. She learned by watching, listening, and practicing whenever she could. Those moments were rare. Life never gave her much free time. Responsibilities came early. Money problems came fast. Music slowly became something she kept hidden, like a secret too fragile to share. Over time, the piano became a memory instead of a habit. Still, even now, when she passed one, her fingers twitched without her noticing. That evening felt no different from any other. The restaurant was busy, filled with people who spoke confidently and laughed loudly. They wore expensive clothes and discussed deals, art, and travel. Their lives felt far away from hers. She carried plates, refilled glasses, and nodded politely. Her body followed routine, but her mind wandered. As she moved through the room, she noticed the grand piano near the corner. It wasn't there every day. It appeared only during special events like a symbol of status. Tonight, it sat quietly, its surface shining under soft lights. She slowed her steps for just a second, then kept going. Looking too long felt dangerous, like waking something she had forced to sleep. She remembered the last time she played. It had been years ago, late at night in a borrowed space. The piano was old, keys slightly worn. But when she played, the world disappeared. No worries, no fear, no future pressure. Just sound and feeling. That memory stayed with her, even as life pushed forward without mercy. Back in the restaurant, a guest snapped fingers to get her attention. She apologized, though she hadn't done anything wrong. That was part of the job too. Apologizing even when the fault wasn't hers. She placed the order down and moved on. The staff around her worked efficiently, each knowing their role. Some joked quietly, others stayed focused. None of them knew about her past love for music. She never spoke about it. Talking about dreams felt risky. People asked questions. People judged. Silence was safer. As the night went on, the energy in the room shifted. Important guests began to arrive. This wasn't a normal dinner crowd. This was something bigger. Managers whispered instructions. Staff stood straighter. The atmosphere grew tense, polished, controlled. She adjusted her uniform and took a deep breath. Nights like this required extra care. One small mistake could cost a job. She reminded herself to stay calm, stay quiet, stay invisible. While clearing a table near the piano, she overheard guests talking about the evening's entertainment. A professional performer was supposed to arrive later. Someone important. Someone respected. She didn't listen closely, but the words stayed with her. Music again, always finding its way back to her. She felt a strange mix of comfort and sadness. Comfort because music was near. Sadness because it felt so far away. That world belonged to others now. People with time, money, and confidence. not someone who worked double shifts and counted coins. As she walked away, she lightly brushed her fingers against the edge of the piano without thinking. The smooth surface sent a small shock through her hand. She stopped, surprised by her own reaction. For a brief moment, the noise of the restaurant faded. She imagined sitting there, playing freely without fear. Then reality returned. A voice called her name from across the room. Not her real name, but the one used at work. She answered quickly and continued on. The rest of the shift passed slowly. Her body felt heavy, but her thoughts were restless. Something felt different tonight. Not louder, not brighter, just heavier, like the air before rain. She didn't know it yet, but this ordinary shift was about to become something she would remember forever. At this moment, she was still just a waitress in a quiet uniform, blending into the walls of a luxury restaurant. No one in that room imagined what she carried inside her. And she didn't imagine it either. Not yet. She only knew that something old had stirred within her. Something patient. Something waiting. And for the first time in years, she didn't push it away. The evening grew heavier as more guests filled the room. The restaurant no longer felt calm. Felt watched. Important conversations floated through the air, mixed with the sound of silverware and low laughter. She moved carefully, aware that every step mattered more than usual tonight. The managers stood closer to the walls, eyes sharp, ready to correct even the smallest mistake. She noticed the piano again. It sat quietly, untouched, almost forgotten. A few guests glanced at it now and then, expecting something to happen. Time passed and still no performer arrived. Whispers began to spread. Someone checked a watch. Another leaned toward a companion and frowned. She tried not to listen, but the tension was hard to ignore. A missing performer at an event like this was a serious problem. The restaurant's reputation mattered. Every detail mattered. She felt it in the way her supervisor clenched their jaw and paced slowly near the entrance. While refilling glasses near the piano, she overheard fragments of conversation. The performer was late. Calls were unanswered. Traffic excuses were no longer convincing. The guests grew restless, their smiles tight and polite. She felt something stir in her chest. Not excitement, not fear, something quieter. A pull. She reminded herself that this was not her place. She was there to serve, not to step forward. Still, her eyes kept drifting back to the piano. The polished surface reflected the lights above, and for a moment she saw herself in it, small and uncertain. She remembered long nights when she used to practice silently, careful not to disturb anyone. She remembered how music made time disappear, how it allowed her to breathe when life felt too loud. Those memories felt distant, but not gone. A nearby table complained loudly about the delay. Another guest laughed it off, but the impatience was clear. The room buzzed with discomfort. She carried a tray past the piano again. Her steps slowed. Her heart beat faster. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind, each one telling her to keep walking. Don't risk it. Don't be foolish. Don't forget who you are. She set the tray down and straightened her posture. For a moment, she stood still. No one noticed. Everyone was focused on their own frustration. She looked toward the staff area. No one was watching her closely. The managers were busy arguing in hushed tones. The guests were distracted. The thought came softly, almost like a whisper. What if? She shook her head slightly, as if trying to push it away. What if was dangerous? What if led to disappointment? What if reminded her of everything she had lost? Still, her feet didn't move. She imagined sitting at the piano. Just one song. Just something simple. Nothing fancy. Enough to fill the silence. Her hands felt warm. Her fingers flexed without permission. Muscle memory waking up after years of sleep. She knew the risks. She could be laughed at. She could be stopped. She could lose her job. The rules were clear. Staff did not perform. Staff stayed in their place. She thought about the rent waiting at the end of the month. The long shifts. The tired mornings. The feeling of being stuck. Then she thought about regret. The quiet kind that stays forever. A guest raised their voice again, asking when the music would start. The tension reached a breaking point. Someone suggested canceling the performance altogether. Her chest tightened. Without fully deciding, she took a small step closer to the piano. No one noticed. Another step. Still nothing. She stopped just beside it, close enough to smell the polished wood. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes unsure but alive. She whispered to herself, barely audible, telling herself this was a bad idea. Yet her hand lifted. Before she could change her mind, a voice behind her spoke sharply. A staff member froze, surprised to see her there. Their eyes widened, silently asking what she was doing. Her throat went dry. She opened her mouth but no words came out. How could she explain something she barely understood herself? The staff member hesitated. The room was already uncomfortable. Attention was slowly drifting toward them. Creating a scene would only make things worse. She lowered her hand, embarrassed. The moment felt broken. Then someone from the guest area spoke up, half joking, half curious, asking if she knew how to play. Laughter followed. Not cruel but dismissive. Her face burned. She wanted the floor to open beneath her. She shook her head slightly, ready to step away and disappear again. But another voice spoke, calmer this time, suggesting that something was better than nothing. The guests wanted music. Any music. All eyes turned toward her. The room fell into an awkward silence. She felt exposed, standing there in her uniform, surrounded by people who looked confident and powerful. She had never felt smaller. Her supervisor hesitated, clearly unsure what to do. Time was running out. The guests were watching. She swallowed hard. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She nodded once. The decision was made. She sat down slowly on the bench. It felt unfamiliar beneath her, yet strangely right. The keys stretched out before her, both inviting and terrifying. She placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes for a brief second. Not to pray, just to breathe. The noise of the room faded into the background. All that remained was the piano and the quiet space between moments. She lifted her hands and hovered above the keys. The first note had not been played yet, but everything had already changed. The room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears and makes every small sound feel loud. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, though she kept her gaze low. Her hands hovered above the keys, shaking slightly. For a moment, she wondered if she had made the worst mistake of her life. She had not touched a piano like this in years. It was smoother than she remembered, heavier somehow, like it carried expectations inside it. The bench felt unfamiliar, yet her body remembered how to sit, how to balance, how to breathe. Someone cleared their throat in the audience. A chair scraped softly against the floor. The tension tightened. She took one slow breath. Then she pressed a single key. The sound was soft, almost unsure, but it filled the room in a way no voice had. A few people raised their eyebrows. Some leaned back, already prepared to judge. She didn't look up. She couldn't. Her second note followed, then a third. Slowly, carefully, like stepping onto thin ice. The laughter that had lingered earlier faded. Conversations stopped. Even the staff froze in place, trays held midair. Her fingers began to move on their own. Not fast, not flashy, just honest. She played something simple, something she had carried with her for years. A melody shaped by late nights and quiet rooms. A melody built from feeling, not practice rooms or stages. The sound grew steadier. Her hands stopped shaking. Muscle memory returned, gentle but firm, guiding her fingers across the keys. Each note connected to the next like a story being told without words. A guest near the front leaned forward without realizing it. Another lowered their phone, forgetting to record. The room shifted, slowly, quietly. She felt it too. The fear loosened its grip. In its place came focus, warmth, that familiar sense of falling inward, where the world outside no longer mattered. She forgot about the uniform, forgot about the job, forgot about who was watching. She only remembered the music. Her playing grew fuller, deeper. The piano responded, its sound rich and alive. Notes rose and fell like breath. There was sadness in it, but also hope. Loss mixed with resilience. Someone in the audience swallowed hard. A woman near the back wiped her eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. The waitress who had been invisible moments earlier was no longer unseen. Yet she was not performing for them. She was playing for herself. For the years she had stayed silent. The melody shifted, surprising even her. Her fingers followed instinct, not thought. She had never played this exact version before. It was being created in that moment, shaped by the room, the silence, the weight of watching eyes. A manager near the wall slowly lowered their crossed arms. Their expression softened from concern to disbelief. The guests who had smiled politely before now sat still, afraid to disturb the moment. No one checked their watch. No one spoke. She felt a tightness in her chest, not from fear now, but from emotion. Memories surfaced as she played. Old rooms, dim lights, nights when music was her only comfort. She let it all flow into the keys. The piano carried it effortlessly. Time lost its shape. She did not know how long she played. Minutes felt like seconds, or maybe the other way around. When she reached the final part, the melody slowed naturally, like a story nearing its end. Her hands softened. The notes became lighter, more fragile. The last note lingered in the air. Then silence returned. Not the awkward silence from before. This one was full, heavy with feeling. No one moved. She kept her hands resting on the keys, afraid that if she lifted them too soon, the moment would break. Her heart raced. A quiet thought crept in. What if they hated it? What if this silence meant disappointment? She opened her eyes. The room looked different. Faces that once showed boredom now showed shock. Curiosity. Respect. Someone stood slowly, unsure at first. Then another followed. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger. Soon the entire room was filled with clapping. She flinched slightly, startled by the sound. She stood up awkwardly, unsure what to do with her hands. She had never stood on a stage before, never been the center of attention. The applause continued. A few guests smiled at her warmly, not politely, not dismissively, genuinely. She felt tears rise but forced them back. This wasn't the place to cry. Her supervisor approached slowly, disbelief written clearly across their face. They nodded once, not in authority, but in acknowledgement. She stepped away from the piano, legs unsteady. The bench felt farther away than it should have. Whispers filled the room now, but they were different. Softer. Curious. Who is she? Where did she learn to play like that? She returned to the side of the room, suddenly unsure where she belonged again. Was she still staff? Was she something else now? A guest stopped her gently, thanking her. Another followed, offering a quiet compliment. She nodded, overwhelmed. Words stuck in her throat. She had never imagined this moment. Not like this. Not here. Her hands still tingled. The piano sat behind her, silent once more, but it felt different now, like it had spoken for her when she couldn't. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The night was far from over, but something inside her had shifted. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. And for the first time, she wondered what might come next. The applause slowly settled, but the energy in the room stayed high. It felt like everyone was breathing differently now. Lighter somehow. She stood near the wall, unsure whether to return to work or remain still. Her hands still trembled, not from fear anymore, but from the rush that followed something honest and unexpected. Guests spoke in softer tones, careful not to break whatever had just happened. Some leaned toward each other, whispering with wide eyes. Others kept looking at her, as if trying to understand how someone they had ignored moments ago could create something so moving. She picked up an empty tray, more out of habit than instruction. The routine helped her calm down. Work had always been her anchor. She walked slowly, aware that eyes followed her now. The feeling made her uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being noticed. A guest stopped her politely and thanked her again, saying the music had reminded them of something long forgotten. She smiled awkwardly and nodded. Compliments felt heavy, like gifts she didn't know how to carry. Another guest asked where she had studied. The question caught her off guard. She answered honestly, quietly, saying she hadn't studied anywhere special. The guest looked surprised, then thoughtful. The managers gathered near the back, speaking in hushed voices. She couldn't hear their words, but she could feel the change. The worry that had filled the room earlier was gone. In its place was something close to pride. She kept working, clearing tables, refilling glasses. The tasks grounded her. Still, nothing felt the same. The room itself felt warmer, less distant. One guest asked if she would play again later. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. She didn't want to promise something she might not be allowed to give. She smiled gently and said she didn't know. The piano remained silent, but it no longer felt like decoration. Felt like a witness. As the evening continued, a few guests approached her one by one. Some offered encouragement. Others simply said thank you. One mentioned a friend who loved music. Another spoke about a small gathering where live piano was appreciated. Each interaction left her more overwhelmed. She nodded and listened, careful not to assume too much. Life had taught her that excitement could fade quickly. Promises often disappeared by morning. Her supervisor finally approached her, asking softly if she was okay. There was no anger in their voice, only curiosity. She answered honestly, saying she was fine, just surprised. The supervisor nodded and told her she had handled herself well. The words stayed with her longer than applause. In the kitchen, co-workers gathered around her, eyes wide with disbelief. Some smiled proudly. Others teased gently, asking why she had never mentioned her talent. She shrugged, unsure how to explain years of silence. One co-worker said they always knew there was something different about her. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. As the night wound down, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Plates stacked, chairs moved, the air filled with tired relief. She changed out of her uniform at the end of the shift, folding it carefully like always. But tonight it felt different, like it belonged to someone she was slowly growing beyond. Before leaving, she glanced back at the dining room. The piano sat in the corner, waiting. She felt a mix of gratitude and fear. Outside, the night air was cool. The city sounds felt louder than usual. She walked home slowly, replaying the evening in her mind. Every note, every face. Doubt crept in as the excitement faded. What if this was just a moment? What if nothing came from it? She reminded herself not to expect miracles. At home, she sat quietly, letting the silence settle. Her fingers tapped lightly against the table without her realizing it. Sleep came slowly. The next day, the restaurant buzzed with quiet excitement. Staff whispered. Someone had shared a short clip online. Not many had seen it yet, but enough to spark curiosity. She tried to focus on work, but customers asked about the night before. Some recognized her. Others simply smiled knowingly. She stayed humble, careful not to let attention change her behavior. Life was still life. Bills still waited. Responsibilities still called. Yet something inside her had shifted again. A small door had opened. Later that evening, she was asked to play once more. This time there was no doubt, no laughter, only respect. She sat at the piano again, calmer now. The music flowed easily, like a conversation resumed. The audience listened, and as she played, she understood something important. This was not about fame or applause. It was about being seen finally as her whole self. When the night ended, she didn't know where this path would lead. But she knew she would no longer ignore the quiet voice inside her. The world had listened once, and it might listen again. The days that followed felt unreal, like walking through familiar streets that suddenly looked different. She returned to her routine, waking early, preparing for work, moving through the city like she always had. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. At the restaurant, people treated her with a new kind of care. Not special treatment, not praise at every step, but respect. Conversations paused when she walked by, then resumed softly. Guests asked about her music instead of just their orders. She answered politely, keeping her words simple. She didn't want to exaggerate what had happened. She didn't want to scare it away. A manager asked if she would be willing to play during quieter evenings. Not as a replacement for her job, but as something extra. The offer was gentle, with no pressure. She took time to think before agreeing. Saying yes felt like stepping onto uncertain ground. But saying no felt like closing a door she had waited years to see open. She said yes. The first evening she played again, the room was smaller, calmer. No elite crowd. No tension. Just people eating dinner, listening. Her hands were steadier this time. She allowed herself to enjoy the moment instead of fearing it. The music didn't try to impress. It simply spoke. Words spread slowly. Not in headlines or big announcements, but through quiet sharing. Someone mentioned her to a friend. A short video traveled from phone to phone. People came asking if it was true that the waitress played like that. She stayed grounded. She still cleaned tables. Still counted tips. Still lived in the same modest room. Fame felt far away, almost imaginary. One afternoon, she received a message through the restaurant. Someone had heard her play and wanted to talk. Not a promise. Just a conversation. She almost ignored it. Past disappointments made her cautious. Life had taught her not to expect too much. Still, curiosity won. They met in a quiet public place. The conversation was respectful, focused on her love for music, not her sudden attention. No pressure, no big claims, just interest. She left feeling hopeful but careful. Weeks passed. Opportunities came slowly. A small event here, a private gathering there. Nothing flashy, nothing guaranteed, but each step felt real. She practiced more now. Late at night, early mornings, on borrowed pianos when she could. Music became part of her daily life again. Not a memory, not a secret. There were hard days too. Doubt returned often. Some nights she wondered if she was chasing something impossible. Other times she feared losing the stability she had worked so hard to keep. She reminded herself that she didn't need everything to change overnight. Progress didn't have to be loud. At the restaurant, she slowly reduced her hours. Not because she was above the work, but because she needed space to grow. The staff supported her. Some even came to listen when she played elsewhere. One evening, after a small performance, a stranger thanked her for reminding them why they loved music in the first place. The words stayed with her. She realized then that her journey was not about proving anything. It was about connection. Months later, she stood once again near a piano, not as a surprise, not as a secret, just as herself. The room was quiet, attentive. She took a breath and began. She played with confidence now, but not arrogance. Each note carried gratitude. For struggle, for patience, for the courage to step forward when fear was loud. She still remembered the night she almost walked away. The night she almost stayed invisible. Life didn't turn perfect. There were still bills, still uncertainty, still moments of fear. But there was also purpose. She learned that talent doesn't disappear when ignored. It waits, and sometimes all it needs is one brave moment. As she left the stage that night, applause followed, warm and steady. She smiled quietly, knowing she had earned this not by chasing attention, but by answering something true inside her. She walked home under familiar streets, the city lights glowing softly. Her life wasn't suddenly grand, but it was honest. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was becoming. And somewhere in the distance, a piano waited, ready to listen again.